Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. It's lovely to have you all this morning for our webinar. Hello! Kristen is running the project behind the webinar today, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. And Kristen and I are both here, but basically I'm going to do the chatting and Kristen is going to do all the clicking because two heads are better than one. So in terms of how this is going to run, we're just going to chat through. There's a slideshow that you'll be able to see on and off. We've got videos that will play on and off, and we'll refer to different documents that you'll be able to find in the handout section. So we might crack in. Start with the first poll. Let's start. So we're going to start with the first poll. These are just questions about your confidence and knowledge in terms of providing culturally and linguistically sensitive services. As you see, the poll is open and we'll be able to see you clicking on the answers. So, excellent. And we're just going to ask the second question now.
I'll just share the results.
Here we go. So, as you can see on your screens, you can see that some people are somewhat confident. There's a couple of people who are maybe not at all confident, and a few of you feel like you're quite confident. So that's really good news. And we'll just ask the next poll question and then we'll crack into the contents of the webinar. So this one is about how knowledgeable you feel you are in terms of providing CALD services. Just collecting the responses. Great. We'll close that poll. Wonderful. Okay, so
there's the results.
There's our results there. So we can see that, there were a few more people, I suppose, feel like they've got some knowledge in the CALD space, which is good. And again, some of us who are feeling a little bit less confident. So in terms of the background for this webinar, I'd love to say it's just because Kristen and I felt like doing something fun on a Thursday, but that's not particularly true. The background to the webinar is in 2017, there was a clinical trial that was run by 7 organisations who came together to run a clinical trial that explored whether digitally fabricated ankle-foot orthoses were a reasonable, viable solution for children with physical disabilities. So that project ran for almost 2 calendar years and involved, testing the product alongside families and children with disability, looking at the mechanical viability, looking at the qualitative experiences of the families who participated in the trial. And the results of that were really positive. So at the end of that, we had a product in terms of digitally fabricated AFOs that worked for kids with disabilities, worked for families, and technologically were the same equivalent as the traditionally fabricated AFOs. So in 2018, we thought, well, that's really well and good, and that technology sat within the 2 orthotic clinics that were a part of the trial, but we sort of talked about, is there a way we can have more of an impact on the disability community, and is there a way we can reach more families? So in 2018, 3 of those organisations, so the ones you see at the bottom of your screen, Northcott Innovation and Ability Made, collaborated alongside the New South Wales Government to provide a 2-year project that looked at building the capacity of New South Wales orthotists to use the technology around digitally fabricated AFOs, so to kind of upskill that orthotic community to use the technology in their clinics, as well as 2 additional pieces of work, one around better supporting rural and remote communities to access P&O services and better supporting the CALD community to access P&O services. And that one in particular is around helping the community access the services and helping the P&O sector better provide sensitive services to CALD communities. So that's what spurred on this webinar, that last part of that capacity building project. And the 3 organisations, so Northcott Innovation and Ability Made, are the ones who are, I suppose, behind this webinar today, but we've received funding from the New South Wales Government to run it. So that's the background for the project and why we're doing it. So let's crack into the content around why CALD appropriate services are really important. So the first thing, I suppose, that Kristen and I wanted to recognise is that whilst, we would love to sit here and act like we're the experts on CALD inclusiveness, In reality, I am not an individual from a CALD background. Krishna has a CALD background, but it's more around language for her and her community. So I suppose we thought about the best way to get, I suppose, a bit of a first-person perspective on CALD appropriate services, and we interviewed Tara and Ruwaida, who are both disability sector workers, on why they thought CALD appropriate services were important. So we're just going to watch their video. It goes for 3 and a bit minutes, and then you'll come back to us. So we're just going to play the video now.
Having to think about that, there isn't a time or an experience that really stands out to me where I can say that I did have a really positive experience. That's pretty sad to admit. But yeah, it's interesting because, you know, other than just somebody being really respectful and you know, good at what they do, it didn't really stand out from a cultural point of view.
Well, I think the most important thing that we as people need to realize and understand is that regardless of cultural backgrounds or nationalities, that everybody needs to be treated with respect and dignity. And when you think of respect and dignity, it could be as simple as, you know, allowing, you know, what's different for someone shouldn't change your perspective of doing something, you know, differently with someone else. For example, if you are maybe going to be supporting a young child, usually with young children, you have a parent there or a carer, and commonly you'll ask, is, you know, this is what's going to happen, I will need to do this, I will need to take the shoes off, I will need to have the shirt removed. And the parent would usually give consent. Why should that change as, you know, we get older? And even if the person doesn't need someone there to give that consent and they are an adult, I think being respectful is to acknowledge that anybody could feel quite overwhelmed or a little bit embarrassed about having to expose some part of their body for whatever reason. You know, it could be something that's happened to the person in the past that makes the person uncomfortable. It could be from a cultural background. So for myself, you know, people see I wear a headscarf, so automatically, you know, people kind of assume that, ooh, you know, I don't know, is she gonna, you know, take off her shoes? You know, am I allowed to touch her hand? And things like that. But why would you not treat somebody else who doesn't wear a headscarf in that same way?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's asking their, you know, asking, is it okay? May I, you know, have a look at this? You know, this is what is expected. And also giving people the opportunity to, you know, consent to yes or no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So just what Ruwaida's saying, you know, I mean, if Ruwaida and I walked into the same room at the same time, people would have different assumptions about Ruwaida than what they would about me, but Ruwaida and I share the same belief. So it's not, even though sometimes visually we might get cues about people's culture or people's religious beliefs, you don't really know unless you're having conversations with people and you're talking to them and trying to understand, and not going, you know, making it really formal and, oh my God, we have to do all these cultural things, but just saying, you know, is there anything we need to be aware of, or like Ruwaida mentioned about procedures and stuff. So you're not just relying on assumptions, you're actually asking and finding out.
Excellent. Okay, so I think some of the things that really come to light in what Ruwaida and Tara were talking about, I think the first thing is maybe the second sentence that Tara says is that maybe we're not doing a very good job at providing culturally appropriate services as an entire community now as we speak. So I don't think it's something that the P&O sector is particularly struggling with. I think it's something that the Australian community is struggling with. So I think it's very much something from our perspective that it's a whole of community need, and it's a whole of community passion that we all need to sort of up our game and be a little bit more sensitive in how we provide services, because it's super sad that Tara feels like she's never received a sensitive service. The other reason that it's really important is in an Australian context. Obviously, I've got some points up there on that slide. We are home to the world's oldest continuous culture, so it's not a new thing in terms of multiculturalism or diversity, because for an Australian sort of community, it's always been like that. And we have more than a quarter of our community were born overseas, with 20% of them speaking languages other than English. So there's a large proportion of our community who fall into this culturally and linguistically diverse kind of portion of the community, which means in terms of people who are accessing P&O services, it's a huge portion of who accesses P&O services. It's also a really specific strategy that's under the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So for those of you that work in the disability sector, you may or may not be aware of it. For those of you that might be more in the health sector, it might not be a strategy that you're familiar with. So what we've done in one of the handouts, we've got a reference list. So we've linked the strategy into that reference list. So you can download the list, go to the strategy and look at it for yourself. But that strategy is made up of 5 different things. So it talks about, obviously, the need behind the strategy is that they assume or they anticipate by the end of this year, 20% of participants in the NDIS will be from a CALD background. And the strategy sort of talks about the need to better engage the CALD community, the need to make information about the NDIS and NDIS services more accessible to people from CALD communities. It talks about increasing the capacity of the CALD community to embrace their choice and control around their disability or their disability support requirements or their services. It talks about improving the approach of the service to monitoring and evaluating services for CALD communities. So making sure that whilst as a sector we might be trying to do a better job, that we're checking in to make sure that we really are still aligning to the needs of that community, that we haven't just made that assumption, which is a point that Rueda made, assumed that we think we're on the money and that we're just going for it. And lastly, making sure that the cultural competency of NDIA partners, which is service providers, it's community providers, it's individual service providers like a private orthotist, making sure that the cultural competency of those individuals is increased as well. So that CALD strategy is, again, linked in a handout, but that's why I suppose it's so important. And I think the take-home message is that it is important, but if you think about the comments that Rueda made at the beginning, it's also not unachievable. It's predominantly about respect, and I suppose respectfully asking what we can do to support our customers. So we don't need to be the expert on their culture or their background or their story and history. We just need to recognise that it might be different to ours and respectfully ask them, is there anything we can do to support them? So moving on, we're going to talk about some practical strategies, because I know when I dial into webinars, I get a bit sick of listening to people rabbit on, and I just want to know what it is I'm meant to take home and do differently. So the first practical strategy we've got for you is around language, interpreters and translated materials. So the first, we've kind of divided it, I suppose, into things that you can do as an orthotist or as an allied health professional, and what the role of an interpreter might be. So in terms of what you can do, you can use available translated materials. So in the P&O sector, there aren't a lot, truthfully. Northcott Innovation and Ability Made are collaborating with AOPA at the moment on hopefully getting some of the AOPA fact sheets translated. So when they're done, we can probably email them out to everybody who's dialed into the webinar, because we have your contact details. So we can send those when they're done. So they will be hopefully a material that you can reference beyond this webinar. There's also Department of Health sometimes has translated materials that you can use, and international P&O bodies sometimes have translated materials that you can use. So you can obviously hunt around and find them. You can also make an effort to get your materials translated. So getting things translated, so your own service flyer or your own information booklet or your pamphlet that you give customers, or your little fact sheet about how to care for the orthosis or the prosthesis, your little tips and hints sheet, you can get those translated. So obviously there is a cost to getting that translated. You know, we don't live under a rock, it is expensive. But in terms of that, you can also apply for grants. So there's lots of grants that pop up around Harmony Day. They're through local government. Sometimes they're through private health foundations. You can apply for them. So you can apply for grants for little amounts of money to get your materials translated. And often that kind of grassroots project is really well received, I suppose, from funding bodies. So there is funding opportunities out there that would help you to bridge that gap. So it doesn't have to be, I suppose, an economic burden on your business in order to be more inclusive. You can also use everyday English words. So as allied health professionals, we sometimes get a bit caught up in our own allied health vocabulary. We use acronyms, we use really clinical words to describe what we're doing. But if you pair that back to everyday plain English, that often helps in terms of, I suppose, that transparency when you're communicating with someone from a CALD community. And it helps the interpreter to do their job as well. You can also describe what your device, so if I think about an ankle-foot orthosis, you can describe what the device does, not what it's called. So in Arabic, one of the things we discovered, which we'll show you the video in a second, but one of the things we discovered is that there is no single word that translates ankle-foot orthosis into Arabic. Which was, you know, an interesting discovery as we went along in this project. But what there are words to describe like a brace for the ankle and the foot, or I think it was like an external piece of equipment that supports the ankle and the foot. So those sorts of things, absolutely you can use, I suppose, everyday English descriptions of what the device does, not what it's called, to help that person better understand what it is, or help that person better understand how it's meant to be used. The other thing you can do is be patient. So everybody knows the first time you use an interpreter as an example, it's awkward. You're trying to make eye contact with the customer, but then there's a delay between what you say and what the translator says. So then you look at the translator and you stop looking at the customer. Everybody knows it's awkward. But the key thing is that you persevere and that you try and that you're patient, because I suppose the end outcome that we want is for that customer from a CALD background to have equal and equitable access to that information that you're giving them. So patience, I suppose, is the key, and a recognition of doing something different is always a bit tricky at the start, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So you just kind of have to keep persevering. In terms of interpreters, what they can do is actually pretty amazing. So they can support all of your phone-based interactions. So when you do your intake call or your booking call or your confirmation of the appointment call, they can interpret all of those for you on the phone. So phone interpreters can do that. You can also get face-to-face interpreters that can support your actual clinical assessment appointment or your fitment appointment. Or if you don't have a face-to-face interpreter at those appointments, you can also dial in a phone interpreter. So you can have the phone interpreter on speakerphone whilst you're doing your clinical assessment appointment, or whilst you're doing your fitment appointment or your follow-up appointments. So I genuinely encourage all of you to use phone interpreters as a minimum, and then face interpreters if possible. And for those of you that don't know how to access an interpreter, we've got information again in the handout section of how you can contact TIS, because they're, I suppose, the primary interpreter service. And we've got information on how you can use TIS services for NDIS customers. So So there's this very specific way that for NDIS participants, you can access interpreters. So I suppose you can get a feel for what this looks like in practice. We've got a little short video to show you that goes for, about 3 minutes, I think. 3-minute videos, apparently it's our thing. And this video was made by Northcott Innovation and Ability Made in collaboration with New South Wales Refugee Health. So Northcott Innovation and Ability Made run a project alongside New South Wales Refugee Health where we support refugee individuals to access orthotic services and a little bit of custom footwear services on an as-needs basis while they're transitioning into the NDIS system. So it's a bit of a stopgap project. And through that project, we developed a range of translated instruction videos and informational videos. So the videos are translated into a couple of community languages, and they try to go through in really kind of that plain English wording what the ankle foot orthosis is, what the kind of process around the assessment is, and what the process is around the care and the follow-up. So we don't have all of those videos to show you because we don't have time. This is just a video about the assessment, I think. Yeah. So we're going to play the video for you now. It should appear on your screen.
الحصول على مقوم القدم والكاحل. الجزء الأول عملية التقييم والتأكد من ملائمة المقوم. الخطوة الأولى في يوم الموعد الأول يرجى جلب مقومات القدم والكاحل التي يستعملها طفلك أو أي نوع آخر من المقومات أو المساند الخاصة بطفلك. اجلب كذلك الحذاء والجوارب التي يلبسها طفلك حاليا. يجب أن يلبس الطفل سروال قصير أو سروال طويل يمكن رفعه إلى أعلى الركبة بسهولة أو سروال مطاطي ملتصق بالجسم. الخطوة الثانية خلال الموعد الأول ستقابل أخصائي التقويم وهو الذي سيقوم بصناعة مقومات القدم والكاحل الجديدة لطفلك. سيقوم أخصائي التقويم بإلقاء نظرة على ساق وقدم طفلك، وقد يمسك الساق والقدم لمعرفة طبيعة حركتهما. قد يقوم المقوم بقياس الساق والقدم لطفلك باستخدام شريط القياس أو مسطرة، وقد يسألونك بعض الأسئلة. قد يطلب من الطفل المشي في الغرفة لكي يمكن للأخصائي أن يرى حركة الساق والقدم. الخطوة الثالثة عملية تصوير وطبع مقوم القدم والكاحل لطفلك. سيجلس الطفل على منضدة ويمكنك الجلوس إلى جانبه. سيطلب من طفلك أن يلبس جوارب طويلة. سيطلب من الطفل المشي إلى جهاز التصوير ثلاثي الأبعاد والجلوس على منضدة ووضع القدم على الأرض. سيقوم الأخصائي بمساعدة طفلك في وضع قدمه بالموضع الصحيح على الأرض، وذلك من خلال مسكه للقدم والركبة. سيطلب من الطفل الجلوس بهدوء تام أثناء التصوير، ويمكن للطفل خلال التصوير أن يتابع أحد أفلامه المفضلة على التليفون. ستأخذ عملية التصوير أقل من ثانية، وسوف لا تؤذي الطفل ولا يصاحبها أصوات مزعجة. بعد انتهاء التصوير يمكن للطفل أن يخبرنا عن نوع الديكور الذي يفضله على مقوم القدم والكاحل. سيطلب منك الرجوع مرة أخرى في وقت لاحق لرؤية أخصائي تقويم العظام. سترسل الصور ثلاثية الأبعاد لقدم طفلك إلى الطابعة ثلاثية الأبعاد لكي يتم صناعة مقوم القدم والكاحل لطفلك باستعمال مواد أمينة وغير سامة. بعدها يرسل مقوم القدم والكاحل إلى أخصائي تقويم العظام مرة أخرى.
Alrighty. So that video, I suppose, was a nice example of how we've tried to sort of help our customers better understand the process they're about to undergo in terms of having a digitally fabricated AFO made for them. It also got a, happy byproduct of a sneak peek of how the process actually works. So you can see the scanner there in practice, and you can see the process of wearing the sock and sitting at the scanner and taking the scan. If you have questions about the actual digital fabrication process or how that works with the scanner and the printing, please pop it in as a chat question, and we can actually email you some information about how that service works, and we can email you some information about Ability Made, who are the service that do that central fabrication for us. So they're the people who sort of, work the scanners, do the printing. It's certainly not us as allied health professionals. It's way out of our skill set. So if you've got questions about us, pop it in the chat and we'll click you all the information afterwards, and either we'll respond or we'll get Mel from Ability Made to respond to you. Also, quick shout out to Jude and Stacey for being the superstars of the video. Clearly, they make very good film stars for us. So, clinical approaches. So what we've tried to do in terms of clinical approaches is break them down into some simple things you can do before the person has come for their P&O appointment, during the appointment, and after the appointment. So the clinical approaches are sort of broken up into 3 little clusters. In terms of things you can do beforehand, I think the simplest thing is to include questions in your intake process. So be that when people phone to make an inquiry, when you do the booking, however it works in your clinic or your team, but include those questions. So simple things like, would you like an interpreter, or do you require an interpreter? Or is there anything you'd like us to know before the appointment? Or is there anything we can do to support you during the appointment? Those sorts of questions I think are really non-judgmental, and they're also very open-ended. So it gives that participant or their decision maker an opportunity for them to describe to you what they need in terms of a service. You can also provide a social story. So for customers who might be feeling anxious or who have some learning and developmental needs in understanding what's about to happen, social stories are a really, really good tool to use to help them to understand in advance what's happening. So in the handouts, we've got a social story, kind of our base social story that we often use for young customers who may be anxious or who may need some additional supports to understand the process that's about to happen. So you can use that as a bit of a guide, a template, whatever you would like. If you want to make one for your own service, I would strongly recommend you phone a friend or phone a speech therapist. So speech therapists, in terms of that, what's it called, multidisciplinary supports kind of framework, are really, really good at helping you to pitch the language of the social story to the market. So if you predominantly work with adults who have had strokes, then they'll be able to help you pitch that social story in terms of the language levels or the cognitive levels of that customer cohort. Or for us, if we predominantly work with kids who have disabilities, then it's a speech therapist who's been able to help us pitch that social story at the right level. So honestly, phone a speech therapist. They are clever people, and they'll be able to tell you in not a huge amount of time how to kind of frame that social story. So they're really important in helping people to understand in advance what's going to happen. Social stories can also then be translated, but I think you need to be mindful that not everybody can read translated materials. So I still think it's important that we have a combination of written translations and verbal or oral translations so that we're kind of hedging our bets and we're making sure that people, I suppose, are included irrespective of their literacy levels. Other things you can do is make sure that you give customers photos or videos of what's about to happen. So photos of who they're going to meet, photos of your clinic, the room, little tiny video snippets of what part of that assessment might look like. So what does the measuring look like? If you're doing plaster casting, what does that look like? Cutting off the cast, what does that look like? So I think those sorts of little kind of bits of information can help piece together for the customer what's about to happen, and it can help them, I suppose, to better prepare and better organise who they might want to bring with them. So they might want to bring a support person, they might want to bring a decision maker and a support person, but they can only make those decisions if they know in advance what's going to happen. So Photos and videos, I suppose, thanks to iPhones and Samsungs and other brands that I don't know about, using that kind of stuff is really easy these days, and most customers have access to that kind of technology. So it's really easy to sort of take a photo, take a video snippet and send it off to them. And also, I suppose, sending information about the clinic, the people and the setup. So things that are really important to tell them would be things like, at our clinic, we only have male orthotists. That's a very important person to tell someone in advance, so that they might be able to bring a support person if they need one, or a different decision maker if that's what's required for their culture. Things around what that setup is like. So if your clinic, I suppose, is really modern and child friendly and has, you know, pictures everywhere, then tell the person that. But if your clinic might be a bit more clinical, if you have a clinical clinic, that would probably be a really nice thing to sell someone in advance. So to say, oh, you know, when you come to us, you know, our rooms, they look a bit like a doctor's surgery. You know, there's a bed, there's a desk, you know, blah, 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 blah. That means that for that participant or that customer, for them, they can then understand and think, oh, okay, if it's a bit like a doctor's surgery, because of my history or because of my previous experiences, I might find that a bit stressful or worrying, so I can do something different in advance. I can prepare myself in a specific way. I could bring someone with me. I could talk to someone, or hopefully through building rapport with your customers, they'll be able to say to you, I might find that a bit worrying. Can you help me to figure out what we might be able to do? And then you can work with that customer to figure out what might support them to feel, you know, settled in that environment or calm in that environment, and ready to engage in the P&O service. So there are a couple of things that you can do in advance. The other thing, which I've just read off my notes, so lucky I didn't forget to say it, is to think about, if you're in a large organisation or if you work for health, who is within that organisation or that department that you can turn to. So you might have like an Aboriginal liaison officer that you can go to and say, hi, could you help me to support my Aboriginal customers? Or hi, I've got an Aboriginal customer coming. Could you give me some tips and hints on how that might work? Or you might have a different kind of, like a multicultural liaison officer, Chinese liaison officer, whoever's in your organisation or your department. They're resources that you should absolutely tap into and access as you need them. So I'd encourage you to make a relationship with them and get their support as you need it. All right, more clinical approaches during the appointment. We would strongly encourage you to recognise the importance of tea and coffee. So in many, many cultures, the act of tea or coffee or a beverage or a biscuit is really, really important in terms of showing respect and building rapport. It's not very expensive to have a miscellaneous packet of biscuits in the office that you can pull out for these occasions. But that act of, I suppose, offering a beverage, sharing a beverage, or offering a biscuit, sharing a biscuit is really, really important in lots of different cultures. So I would encourage you all, even though it might stretch out your appointment by 5 minutes, or, you know, even though you might not want to drink the cup of tea, it's very important for some cultures that that routine of offering, accepting, engaging is kind of acknowledged and is given the time to sort of take place if that's appropriate for that person's culture. There's also things you can do around the clinic environment, so being conscious of how it's set up. So, you know, do you have doors on your clinic rooms so that if someone needed to get changed, that they've got privacy? Do you have screens like on wheels that you could use? You know, where is the clinic room in relation to the bathrooms? All that sort of stuff can be thought about. And also, if you're supporting customers who may or may not have had trauma-based backgrounds, I'd also encourage you to think about the lighting of the room, the sounds within the room, the smells within the room. So I suppose the more information we can give families or customers in advance about things like that, the better able they are to prepare themselves. Because the last thing that we want, I suppose, is for a customer to come for a P&O appointment and to be very triggered by that setting and to get super distressed. Great. Dress code. So another important thing to consider is your dress code. So for different cultures, modest dress is more appropriate. So things to think about is in really hot weather, how you're dressing, and what impact that may have on the customer. So a good example would be, so for me as a female clinician in summer, if I chose to wear a short skirt and a sleeveless top, my dress may make a customer from a cold background feel a little bit uncomfortable. So if I want to make sure that P&O appointment, or as an OT, the OT appointment goes really successfully, I might change my dress code. So I might wear some long loose linen pants that are still cool and a loose linen top with long sleeves so that my dress doesn't negatively impact the outcome of that appointment. You also need to think about during the appointment what the customer is wearing and how you can, I suppose, help them to prepare. So things like a female customer might prefer to dress modestly, so they might wear thick, opaque stockings, or you could encourage them to wear thick, opaque stockings so that if you need to watch their gait and you're going to ask them to lift up their skirt above the knee or to roll up their trousers above the knee, that what they've got underneath is that thick, opaque stocking, so it's not bare skin. Or you might ask them to wear really loose, stretchy clothes so that when you're doing the range of motion activities that they can remain clothed without having to disrobe. So think about how you run your service and the assessments and the assessment activities that you like to do. And then I suppose consider what kind of adjustments can you make to ensure that if a customer would prefer to maintain a degree of modesty or would prefer to maintain wearing different parts of clothing, how that might work for you, your assessment and clinical activities, and find that sort of middle ground. Absolutely, you should factor in some additional time. So additional time, because sometimes, using interpreters takes longer, additional time so that you can have the tea, the coffee. And I'd encourage you all, I suppose, to think realistically about those appointments and to, schedule it, book it, bill it under the NDIS. So the NDIS is committed to culturally inclusive services. So there's, I suppose, an acknowledgement that sometimes it takes an extra 5 minutes or an extra 10 minutes. So I suppose to pay respect to the importance of cultural inclusion, I would say bill it within reason. It's also important during your clinical appointment to identify who the decision maker is. So for different cultures, the decision maker may not be the participant or the customer themselves. It may not be the parent who brings the child. It may be someone else. So it's worth having a conversation in advance around who might be the decision maker during that actual assessment session, and asking either if they can come or asking how they can be involved. And I suppose for you as a P&O specialist, recognising that that decision maker may not be the person in the room. And our final tip and hint for during the assessment is to have a conversation with the customer or the people coming with the customer around what is the typical use of that device. So different cultures have different daily activities, and you need to consider what that typical use is so that you can accommodate that typical use in the device. So a really, really clear example in terms of paediatric AFO use is for cultures where the child might be required to kneel for long periods of time during prayer. Kneeling in especially static AFOs is fundamentally challenging. So that is something that you should know and understand in advance so that you can either have that conversation or make an accommodation. The last thing we want, I suppose, is for you to make a device, be it a prosthetic or an orthosis, to give it to the customer, for them to take home and then either not use as everyone had imagined, or to misuse the device because there's been a misunderstanding about how much time is being dedicated within that customer's daily routine to different things, different body positions, such as kneeling for prayer. Okay, afterwards, Again, it's things we've touched on before, so it's the decision maker versus the person responsible. So making sure that the person who comes to the fitment appointment is the person who will be helping to care for the device. Also discussing community perceptions of the device. So that will give you a nice indicator around how likely is the person to use the device. And if you have those conversations sort of transparently and openly, then you can start to work through some of those barriers alongside your customers and hopefully find a way through that would mean that they can use the device that you're talking about. I'd also recommend that you guys make a really active effort to have an open door policy on follow-up. So we really want to make sure that these cold customers feel that they've got enough rapport with you that they will phone if it's not working, or they will phone if it's starting to rub, or they will phone if it's starting to, cause a bit of friction at a particular bony prominence. We want to make sure that they understand that the dynamic between you and them means that they can call. What we don't want to happen is for them to feel that there's a power imbalance and that they can't phone you to say it's not working. That's the worst case scenario. So make sure, I suppose, you really invest in a conversation around that follow-up care so that you know and they know that that conversation can be ongoing. We also had, I suppose, pinned down our orthotist Wanda, who is exceptionally shy, so thus won't participate in webinars. But we got some of her thoughts as well as an orthotist, I suppose, who's doing this practice every day, what she thought the best tips and hints were around cold services. Her video goes for maybe 2 minutes, so we'll play that for you now, and then we'll start to wrap up.
So before the appointment, we need to explain it to them what to bring to the appointment and who's to bring to the appointment, because that person needs to be responsible for the use of the AFO. Because we need to do the assessment, we need to touch, sometimes we might touch their body parts, so they could wear something loose, something easy for us to access, like a loose pen or stretchy pen. During the appointment, I will explain it to them what's going to happen next. I ask them before I touch the body part, or if they need change, I might ask them, do you want me to leave the room? So when they're ready, just let me know or come in. So at the fitting time, we just need to let them know and explain it to them, like if there is any problem, they need to contact us, and it is okay to let us know that it's not okay. Also, if they need the interpreter or what language do they speak, and that way we can organize the translator for them. It doesn't matter what background they're coming from, I always treat them with dignity and respect.
Alrighty. So nice take-home messages there from Wanda, which, I suppose reflect what Tara and Ruwaida are talking about in terms of, dignity, respect, seeking consent before performing any kind of clinical activity, and making sure that everybody's aware of what's happening well in advance. Our next strategy, and we're coming to the end, so stay with us, is around connecting with the community. So one of the best things you can do in terms of providing cold sensitive services is to connect with the cold community. For those of you that might not know a lot about your local cold community or might not know how to connect with that community, you can go to your local community centre or community service. You may have a local refugee or settlement service you can connect with. The NDIA and the ECI providers, they can connect you with some different services. Local councils often run services. There are absolutely cold-specific disability services that you can connect with, and community health often have specific outreach programs that you can connect with. In the handout section, we've got a list of a couple of those options of where you can go and start the ball rolling, but my genuine suggestion would be to reach out to those communities. Go to things like Harmony Day, participate, meet people and start building those connections, because we know for the cold community it's a very personal thing. So it's about people and communities. It's not as easy as saying I sent them a flyer. It doesn't really work. You have to go and be a part of that community and meaningfully contribute to the conversation with that local community that's matched to wherever you live. You can also seek out projects and opportunities that pop up in your local area. So Harmony Day is a really good example. There's often mini grants that pop up around Harmony Day. There's events that pop up around Harmony Day. The same happens with different, like Multiculturalism New South Wales. They sometimes offer grants. So looking for projects and opportunities to build a relationship or to further enhance a relationship, or to, I suppose, provide an easier gateway in and out of your P&O service with a specific CALD community is also really important. So I think we are almost at the end. Yes, look at this, wrapping up, exciting times. So in terms of the 5 ways that we kind of think as a P&O professional you can be more inclusive, the first one I suppose is maybe the most important one, or maybe not, we'll see how we go, around knowing why it matters to make your service more inclusive. So realising that inclusion, I suppose, is a human right. All of us are aware of it in terms of including people with disability and people with health support needs, but remembering that people from CALD backgrounds have the same rights, and it's our responsibility to make sure that our services that we offer are inclusive, and I suppose are actively trying to be sensitive to their support needs. Also keeping into the back of your mind maybe the slightly more business-minded reasons around it's an NDIA requirement, and if you do it really well, you can increase your customer base. So if you do CALD inclusion well, then you've got a great in with that community, which might mean you get more referrals, you might get more sales, and more revenue. So 2 reasons, but, you know, important nonetheless. Make sure our second take-home tip is around communicating. So make sure you're talking to customers before, during and after appointments. You're using translators, using translated materials, and you're giving as much information you can in as many different ways as humanly possible to those customers along that journey so that they can be prepared and make accommodations. Also, you can have a conversation about what you can be doing differently. The third strategy is around being practical. So think about those tips and hints that we talked about before and keep that, I suppose, the underlying rule around don't make assumptions. So don't assume that a person from a CALD background just because they wear a headscarf. Also don't assume that they're not from a CALD background because they don't wear a headscarf. So be really, I suppose, sort of down to earth around what that person might need and how you can best support them. And then sort of, you know, implement those strategies from there, basically. Our fourth wrap-up tip is around establishing CALD connections. So contact the communities, reach out, make engagements, build relationships, because then it will help you to be a more sensitive service provider, and I suppose it will help them to better understand P&O services and engage in the P&O sector. And our final tip is remembering that the customer is the expert. They are the expert in their disability or their support requirement, and they are the expert in their culture. So when in doubt, ask them because they know. So you don't have to be the expert on cultural inclusiveness. They are, so just ask them. So pretty easy tips and hints, basically. It's sort of like, you know, being respectful and making sure that the customer is at the centre of the service you provide, and then taking it from there. So we should be almost bang on 10:25. We are doing really well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask this last poll question. So there's 2 questions that are going to come up, and it's literally a pre and post. So the first poll question should be appearing any second now. Around now that you've seen the webinar, how confident are you feeling about providing CALD services? If you could all click on your answer and submit it for us, that would be great. Oh, here we go. Here's your results. Oh, look. Oh, good. Everyone's feeling a bit more confident, and some people are feeling very confident. So that's a nice change. And then we're just going to ask the final poll We'll just wait for the last few people to vote. So you've almost all done it. Okay, I'll share. Great, share those results. Oh, look at that. There we go. So people are feeling more knowledgeable, which is wonderful. So the last thing we wanted to leave you with is our final slide, which is around if you have questions. So if you have questions about providing cold sensitive services, or you'd like to give feedback on today's webinar, or you just want to do a bit of brainstorming around how you might be able to tweak something with your service, or vary something about the process that you're using, please feel free to email us. Our email address is there. You'll either get me or Krishna or Wandai, the orthotist, at that email address. And if you had questions about the digital orthosis service, again, just email us and we can ask. We had some lovely feedback from, I'm going to say, Noosh, as a participant. Thank you very much, Noosh. That is beautiful feedback. We've really had a great, Krishna, snuggle in. We've had a lovely morning this morning chatting to everybody. Well, there you go. Noosh has also given us some feedback about the audio. Thank you very much. That's super helpful. We're obviously not the most skilled webinar hosts, but we will take everyone's feedback on board, especially about that audio, and see if we can figure out a better way to make it work in the future. Thank you for joining us all. We have had a wonderful morning. We hope it's been helpful and assists everyone to tweak their services, their P&O services a little bit, to better cater to the needs of CALD communities. And we look forward to being in contact if you choose to email us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.